I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to The Kathryn Zox Show. And joining me today is James Ellis, author of A Journey of Insights, Lessons in Leadership and Legacy. Jim says that building a successful career and leaving a lasting legacy requires more than just business achievement. Jim's new book, is a part memoir, part leadership guide, and he draws on all his many years in business. At Harvard Business School, he graduated from Harvard Business School, and then he had 12 years. He was at the dean of USC's Marshall School of Business. And I would say his central argument is that good leaders succeed by listening carefully. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to let him explain all of this to you. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on, James or Jim.
Thank you. It's Jim. Thanks, Kathryn. I appreciate it. Good to be here.
All right. Well, we have lots to talk about, and you've had lots of experience, right? So
I certainly have.
And your book has lots of examples of how we can succeed. All we have to do is listening. And I guess all I have to say to you right now is it appears to me that no one's listening to each other. We have a big problem here in business and elsewhere.
You know, you are absolutely right. And I am totally convinced that the leaders that we are seeing and listening to are not listening to one another. And quite honestly, active listening, as I was taught many, many years ago in a class at the Harvard Business School, is about as difficult as anything you do in any career you have. And even as a parent, even in life, just being a good listener totally sets you apart. Many people will say, tell me about your party last night. And as you're telling me about your party, I can't wait to tell you about my party. And that's why I asked the question. So I'm not even listening to you talking about your party. I'm crafting my comments to you about my party. And we're just not listening. And so this professor that I had taught us how to actively listen. And it's a very difficult thing to do. It really
I was
is.
just about to interrupt you, actually. So sort of proving your point, right? But it's true. And exactly, I think that example was perfect. I think that probably all of us do that. Some of us do that more than others. You can't wait to tell your own story.
Yep.
But this has all been translated into real success for you. So, let's kind of break it down. Who do we listen to? You're an entrepreneur, you've been a mentor, all of those things, a professor. So there's different contexts. Does that make a difference?
Not necessarily. I think what you do, and it's interesting because, you could be listening to your employees, you could be listening to your shareholders, you could be listening to your kids, you could be listening to friends, you could be listening to bosses. And quite honestly, the best way to do it is just actively listen. Don't think about anything but what they are talking about. And the way it was taught to me was in a final exam where I was allowed to ask in a 45-minute meeting with someone that I knew, but not particularly well. So I couldn't lead the discussion. I was allowed to ask one question in 45 minutes. And the remainder of the time, my comments were, or repeat the last phrase they said. And I had a 45-minute discussion with a man that I knew, but not particularly well. And in that 45 minutes, I learned that he didn't like his parents. He didn't like the fact he was raised in Pittsburgh. He didn't like the fact his dad was only a foreman at U.S. Steel. He had a drug problem. He had a drinking problem. He didn't envy his sister. He was jealous of her. And there must have been 5 times during that 45 minutes that I wanted to come right across the table, grab him by the collar and say, you got to get help. But I couldn't do that because I was listening. And at the end of that 45 minutes, I was sweating. Now, that's hard to believe you're sweating while you're listening. And because I was concentrating so much on him, and I said, I need to go get a drink of water. And I left the room, and my classmate, who was sitting there as a third party, was actually grading my listening. They sat there, he and this guy sat there, and the guy turns to my classmate and he said, he's really a great guy, isn't he? He absolutely knew nothing about me. But I took the time, 45 minutes, to listen to him talk. And number one, people like to talk and tell about themselves. But number two, we need to listen to that. Now,
But
we
what
don't need to
about,
be
and I'm going to interrupt you
go right, go right
because,
ahead.
yeah, as you're describing the situation, this is what therapists, counselors are taught to do, right? You have a
Right.
client come in, you want to get the info, but you're also, on some ways, guiding them through the conversation. You're not just sitting there for an hour or 45 minutes listening. So, how does that differ from what you're well, in this example, how does that differ?
I guided him through the conversation by repeating the last phrase that he said. So I allowed him to continue to go down that road. Now, at some point, a therapist has to come back and say, maybe not you should, but maybe have you considered? Have you thought about? Kind of lead them in a manner such that they come to the conclusion they need to do this. They need to get themselves out of the spiral. And I typically am talking about a business environment. So I'm not talking about a personal situation, because in the business world, you really don't want to get too involved in their personal life, even though it does impact their performance. There's no question about the fact that what's happening in their outside life is impacting their performance in the office or the factory. So you don't necessarily want to be telling them what to do, but you certainly want to make sure they understand that they've got a problem, and if you can do anything to help them, you do. But you really want to find out what are the issues that maybe can help me as I run my business or my school or whatever it is. So the more that you hear that, the better off you are. The more you ask those questions, particularly employees.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. How does that really specifically translate what you're talking about into being successful in business, to being a successful leader in a business situation?
I'll give you a great example on that, Kathryn. A CEO of a Fortune 20 company had convened a meeting of about 400 of his top executives. And at the beginning of the meeting, a guy gets up and says, our quality sucks. And it was just that the air went out of the room. And the CEO said, what do you mean? He says, the products we're shipping to our customers are terrible quality. And the CEO said, I'm going to adjourn this meeting for about an hour. I want you all back here in an hour. He completely changed the whole tenet of the meeting to talk about quality and the quality of their service and the quality of their products. And at the end, he said to all of them, okay, we're each going to take trips to listen to our customers and hear what they have to say about our performance and our products. And completely changed it to the point where the company 2 years later won the Malcolm Baldrige Award for quality of any company in the United States. Completely changed everything by just listening to that one employee. And that was a pretty gutsy thing to do, to stand up in front of 400 people and the CEO and say our quality sucks.
Yeah, because
But
you'd
that
expect the
changed it.
opposite, right? I mean,
You expect retribution.
yeah.
Yes, no question. And that's what people are worried about when they won't speak up in situations. They're worried about retribution. We as leaders have to make sure that we give them the opportunity to feel free to express their concerns and their opinions. We have to do that. That's
What?
what
Yeah, go
got this
ahead.
country. That's what got this country going, was freedom of speech. It's the
Yeah.
same thing has to happen in a work environment.
What about customer service? I'm sort of bringing it down to, having direct relationships with customers, let's say, of the company, whatever. They don't seem to do that. They have, when I have an issue and I'm speaking to customer service, no matter what the industry, it always seems they're sort of placating me, but they're not really listening to me, and their intentions are not really to do something about my problem.
You're right, and they're wrong in doing that. They go on defense real fast. They should not be defending. They should be listening and hearing you complain about what your issue is, or bring to the fore what the problem is, and then they go, let's help you solve the problem. And they need to do that, and good companies try to do that. And interestingly enough, the people on the customer service phone lines and the customer service online discussions should be doing exactly that. And they need to be encouraged to do that, incentivized to do that, to make sure that they're really listening and then transcribing what the problem is and getting back to people that can do something about it.
You had a problem, as I understand it, or there was an issue that you resolved. You were the former dean, as I think I mentioned in the intro, at the University of Southern California, the School of Business.
Right.
But there was a big issue of them, as I understand it, letting you go, and it was controversial. How did you handle that?
Basically, once I figured out that what had transpired was really done out of something over which I had no control. There were people that were trying to hold on to their jobs. There were people that were trying to plant a flag in the sand, to make the point that they were in charge. I had no choice but to step down. Um, it wasn't because I had done anything, and it really, as they told me, and it was basically because I was the leader that I was being asked to step down because a number of things had happened on my watch in my school, which wasn't necessarily true. And it wasn't necessarily true. So I had to make my point. And so it was one of those things that, I had to make my point. I did, but I was not in charge and I was asked to step away. And so I did. Had no choice.
And
It
you did
wasn't
it,
easy.
yeah,
It wasn't easy.
graciously, yeah,
Well, I tried. I
yeah.
tried. I mean, I fought it. I fought it, and behind closed doors, I certainly took the took my superior to task because I felt that she was very, very wrong in the situation. And I said, I'd like to stay and solve whatever problems you think we have. She said no. She just wanted to make a statement that she was in charge, and because of that, I had to go. And
And
now
then what
I
happened after that?
on my very last day in the role, I put an op-ed to the Los Angeles Times stating my position, what had transpired, and let it go. And that really helped me purge my own concerns, my own thoughts. And since that time, I kind of let it go. I haven't thought about it.
What about people who don't really have that opportunity, or no one's, you can't, yes, they write to the New York Times, the LA Times, but they don't have maybe the position that you had, obviously. So what's their recourse?
That's a really good question. They don't necessarily have a recourse because they don't have a voice. And many times, what's being written and what was written about me in the newspaper was, in essence, slanted and wrong, but I had no voice to get back at them, and to state my position. And so, in many cases, we don't have a voice. And I took the shot that they might put my op ed piece in there. I didn't have any clout with the Los Angeles Times. I had no status, but I wanted to state my point. Unfortunately, they said, this is I wasn't being vindictive. I just said, let me state my side of the case. And they allowed me to do so. It is hard. You're right. Although in today's world with social media, with blogs, etc., there is a place for people's voice where they can do something to just talk it out. If they do it in a good way, don't do it in a vindictive way. Just say, here's my side of the story. And in many cases, it does get back appropriately to the right people.
Okay, changing topics, like, totally changing topics, but because your book is full of all kinds of insights, right? And that's what we're here for. Um, you talk about family, leadership, and personal values. How does that come into the picture?
Well, your values are really put into your being early on by your family. However, that family is, and as we know, there are a lot of dysfunctional families, and there's a lot of very functional families. And so, what happens is you have those values, you have role models who you see in your early years. In many cases, you try and emulate them both positively and negatively. And those values carry into your career. Work ethic was something I got from my dad. Attention to detail. I got that from a first boss. A sense of urgency. I got that from another boss. And the sense of urgency I actually got from a peer, and she was amazing, teaching me just how to quickly react to something. And I think that we get these values from various places. We don't know where they all come from, but as we move up the ladder in any organization, or we do more things in our careers, these things come to the fore, and it's really amazing. You kind of say to yourself, "Where did I learn that?" And yet it really is a positive thing for you, or it can be a negative thing for you. If you came from a family that's very argumentative and you think dialogue is a good thing, and it's okay as long as you're doing it in a very nice way with people, and you're not just arguing, but you're really stating your point. So I think we learn a lot from our families. And that's why our job as parents is to be good role models, and try and let our kids see how we do things the way we feel it should be done, and they can take it from there.
But Jim, what about when you're in this situation? Let's say you're in a big corporation and you have values and that come from a dysfunctional family, and that's impacting your work, not in a good way. And so you have your superiors telling you that you're not doing a good job, this is not working out. Doesn't one have to, actually the employee has to be listening and be able to accept that and really take a look at themselves, which I don't think is always, it's difficult to do in that kind of a situation.
Absolutely. You're right about that. I mean, somebody's got the stick, and you've got to listen to what they have to say. It's their business. They're the ones that are being held responsible for the performance of their division or their company or whatever. And as long as you're part of it, you've got to play the game the way they want you to play the game, even though that may be something you're not used to doing or something you may not understand. You kind of, whether I hate saying this, but it's kind of my way or the highway. And basically, when you're working with someone, and as a leader, it's incumbent upon you to explain that to them, not just to land on their head and say, you're doing this wrong, this is terrible, but let me explain what I want. Give them an opportunity to make that correction. If they do, great. If they don't, then maybe we're putting a round peg in a square hole, and we should move on. So it needs to be done in a nice way. And some leaders are not particularly pleasant about it. And some are great in terms of the way they encourage, help, develop their people.
Why does mentorship matter so much? Because you do talk about that in detail.
We all need somebody to talk to whose agenda is us. And when I go to someone who I can consider to be my mentor, and I've had many mentors along the way, I want to say, I've got a problem, or I'm thinking about this, or what should I do here? I want the agenda of this meeting to be about me. I need your help. And a mentor is really good about taking all of their issues, their personal issues, and setting them aside and saying, okay, let me listen to what Jim has to say and what he's trying to do, and see if I can help him. And I'm not going to tell him what to do. I'm going to go back to not saying you should. I'm going to go back to saying, have you considered, have you thought about, and sort of guide them. Have you thought about doing this, taking a job in this industry? Yeah, but I don't like it. Okay, what about thinking about this one? Well, that's not a bad thought. I hadn't considered that before. So your job is kind of open that aperture so they might think more clearly about what's going on and what they might be able to do outside of what they're doing now, whether it's some kind of activity or whether it's an entire career.
So as you talk about, so this power of listening really is also leads to relationship building. That's what you're saying.
Without a question. Yes. Yes. I mean, if we think about the ultimate relationship of two partners, man and wife, man and man, wife and wife, it doesn't matter. The only way you build that relationship is listening to one another.
That's true. 50% of, 50% of marriages end up in divorce. So I don't know how well we're doing on that, with that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What about, and when you've gone through one career and now we're living so long, we can, I guess, go through many careers, right? But all of this applies no matter what career you choose, right? Even when you change careers, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we can use these skills when we decide to reinvent ourselves. Talk about that. Is one really reinventing themselves? Is that really the right word if they want to change careers?
Yeah, it is the right word.
It is?
It really is. I mean, I went from a business career to an academic career. What were the tenets of my business career that helped me in my academic career? Well, sense of urgency, customer service, attention to detail. Those are as applicable in academia as they are in business. And in the case of you're working with young minds and trying to help young minds set themselves on a path of success, it's the same thing as trying to take your business and put it on a path for success. So, yeah, you take those values from one career to another. And in today's world, these young people who are coming in are going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 different careers. And they're not just going to change jobs, they're going to have careers. And in my dad's time and his dad's time, many of our forefathers had one career. They worked for one company for 40, 50 years. That just doesn't happen anymore. And so they have to take those values from one career to another, and they do have to reinvent themselves because in many cases, what happens in one industry doesn't work so much in what happens in another.
What happens when you're dealing with robots?
Well, that's really something that's right in front of us.
Yeah.
And we have to be prepared for that. We have to be prepared as leaders. We have to be prepared even as workers. What do we do with robots? What do we do with AI? How do we handle that? To me, both of those, robots and AI, are both tools that will help us in what we do. We just have to understand this is a tidal wave that's coming our way. We either need to swim into shore with it, or we fight it, but we drown. And we just need to figure out a way it's going to help us in terms of furthering our own lives.
And as you're saying this, I'm thinking about, and we have to listen to all the information that we are getting about how to do just what you're talking about, how to manage AI. Because right now I hear people, I don't want to have anything to do with AI. It's going to ruin everything. They're not listening to what the good and the bad, and gathering the information in that way. That's a problem. You're either for it or you're not.
Well, and that's absolutely correct. And if you think back, and I'm old enough to think back far enough, that same thing happened with computers. How about the CEO of the computer company that said there will never be a computer on people's desks? That's just not going to happen. Or how about the professor who said to me when I was in class getting ready for a final exam, you can't use the handheld calculator in your final exam. You still have to use your slide rules. Well, when I get out in business, I'm going to get to use the handheld computer. I'm going to get the calculator. I'm going to get to use a computer. I might as well start now. Don't fight it.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with AI. It's the same thing with robots. They're there hopefully to help us. Yes, it will change things in industry and in academia and how we teach students. And we need to make sure we're continuing to teach critical thinking and the side of life that only humans can do.
Yeah, instead of automatically resisting the change. And, those were good examples. I think I have another one. I think when the telephone was invented and people were beginning to use it in their homes, I think they said the same thing. Well, if you're going to talk on the telephone, it's going to ruin relationships with people. You won't have a relationship with people because you're going to be on the telephone, which of course it had the opposite. It connected people. But
right, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right. It's technology can be scary early on. We just have to understand that there are, and as you said it very appropriately, there's good and bad to every technology. And we need to put a fence around the stuff that's bad if we can. And we need to utilize what's good about them.
We only have a couple minutes left. So we want to you can give us more information. And I hope everybody is listening. More information about where we can get your book. I assume bookstores everywhere online, Audible.
Bookstores. We haven't done the Audible yet. We will get that done. That's just a matter of me finding the time to do it because I want to do it in my own voice. Amazon will be shipping the books next week and on September 1st. And then they'll be in bookstores as well. And JamesGEllisAuthor.com is my website. And that's the best way. And I can be contacted through that website. And I'm really good at answering those concerns and questions that people come at me with. So happy to communicate as best I can on my thoughts.
Okay, that's great. So you really do answer all of them? That's a big
Kathryn, I did it.
undertaking. Yeah.
I did 300 emails a day in my career. It's not that big a deal. You just have to take the time to do it. And if someone takes the time to ask the question, my job's take the time to answer it.
That's great. Well, it's great having you on the show today. Lots of obviously good information. I was listening. Everyone was listening. So, which is a good
Great.
thing. Title of the book again is A Journey of Insights, Lessons in Leadership and Legacy. And I have been talking to James, AKA Jim Ellis. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathryn. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Great having you.
Good to be with you.
Yep. I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to The Kathryn Zox Show. And joining me today is author Domenica Furrow, author of You Are What You See. For millions of women, television wasn't just entertainment. It was an instruction manual, teaching us what relationships would look like, how ambitious women should behave, and how much of ourselves we should sacrifice to be accepted. Domenica Furrow, author of You Are What You See, poses a provocative question. What if the stories that raised us got it wrong? The book has been described as funny, insightful, and deeply relatable. And she revisits the iconic characters and storylines that defined a generation to uncover the hidden lessons behind dreaming, makeover culture, workplace ambition, female friendships, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. Welcome to the show, Domenica. Nice to have you on.
Thank you, Kathryn. It's great to be on.
Okay, so this is a hot topic for women. So we're talking about a whole generation of television shows, films that impacted the way we as women see ourselves, or that generation saw themselves in terms of our relationships. I'm not going to repeat my intro, but in terms of actually all the context and where we work, relationships, family. Yeah. So how did this happen? What was the process?
So I wrote an essay in the pandemic that ended up going viral. I'm a playwright, and it's not like I could put a play on then. So I wrote this essay about an experience I had, my first time losing my virginity, and what that going into my experience, but also going into how that has been depicted in film and television. And there was a huge response. It really resonated with people. And I think from there was this germ of the idea of, okay, well, what if I looked at all of these different areas of my life as a woman and how they were impacted by the shows and the films that I grew up watching, and even some of the books I grew up reading, that we all grew up reading, and what impact did they have? And I was curious to discover, maybe it would be positive. Let's see, let's just go along and explore. And I learned a lot in writing this book. I also rewatched a lot of these series and these films, and some films that I grew up loving was really depressing watching them again as an adult woman.
So first of all, losing one's virginity, that's a big thing for a woman. And it changes, as you're saying, generation to generation, when it's acceptable, when it's not acceptable. And things have, I think, really changed in terms of that, and the impact that social media has on us, as opposed to the shows that you were watching. So let's go back to some of those shows, and how did it impact the choices you made as a woman, as a young woman?
I think for me, most films that we grew up watching and seeing, at least my generation, I'm a millennial, they were made by men for the most part. And that's still pretty true to this day. There's a show on Hulu right now, Furious, which is excellent, and everyone is really loving it. And I think part of what's so great about it, it looks at a female serial killer. And often we see that, right? We see it in films and television, but the reason is, oh, my boyfriend cheated on me, or I'm trying to get revenge on the other woman. It's not really, the women kill so seldom. And the reason they do is often a case like Lorena Bobbitt, right? Where she was being raped constantly by her husband. And that is the impetus to do something like that.
To cut off his penis.
Yes, to cut off his penis, because she's being tortured for as long as she's been tortured. And she becomes a punchline. She becomes a joke. But really, there was something much darker going on there. And with Furious, it looks at, okay, well, what if this serial killer is a child who was sexually trafficked? And that, it feels so real and refreshing. And there are these amazing female characters. And watching it, I really feel the difference of, oh, wow, when a show is made and nurtured by women, the female characters feel really authentic. And I think that for me as a child, I didn't know who was writing the characters I grew up watching. When I would watch Sex and the City, I had no idea that all of those women were written by men. I watched them and I thought, oh, that's what a woman is. That's what it is to be a woman in your 30s. And I want to be Carrie and I want to be Samantha. And then you grow up and you realize, oh, these women aren't real. And I think in many films and television shows, when it comes to loss of virginity, it doesn't really look at what that is for a woman and for our bodies and how that can look many different ways. It's often this kind of clumsy attempt. It's very brief, and then that's it. It feels like it's from the guy's perspective, because for the guy, yeah, it is clumsy, and their biggest concern is, I want to last a little longer. But it doesn't really go through, like, what does it mean for a woman to be penetrated for the first time? Like, what does that do to our bodies? And there were a lot of films that I think have shown penetration in like very strange, unrealistic ways that can then set us up with certain expectations. Like, I knew, for me personally, everything I saw led me to expect that sex would be a certain way. And that if it wasn't that way, there was something wrong with me particularly. And something that was really fascinating about writing this essay and posting it into the world. And I was worried. I was like, okay, well, what if it is just me? What if I am the only one who thinks this way? And yet it was so depressing and hard to find out that so many women had had really traumatic and challenging experiences and felt so seen by this essay and just never felt comfortable talking about it.
Well, one of the things, though, I do think that women do now, I'm a baby boomer, so we are from completely different generations. So this is obviously very interesting to me. But women do tend, I think, to talk about, say, when they lost their virginity, much more so than men. I don't. I mean, maybe I don't have. Obviously, I'm not a man. I don't have insight into that. But don't you think that women do share from generation to generation more so than men do?
I think they shared the stories of like how, but I don't know that after I wrote my essay, I learned that a lot of the women in my life had had really painful experiences with sex for years and didn't feel comfortable talking about it. I think
Uh,
we talk about, did you have sex? What, like, was it okay? Did you, and we leave it there. I don't know that we delve deep into conversations, at least for my generation, but even honestly, conversations I had with my mother, conversations I had with my aunts. I learned a lot that I had never known before.
well, I think that in my generation, it was sort of like, well, it wasn't so much I'm going to be a virgin when I get married. That was kind of what perhaps, and we were influenced by the films and the television shows at the time, didn't really buy into it. And so by the time we got to college, it was one by one. Oh, did I tell you? And maybe you are right. But with a little bit of reluctance, oh, I lost my virginity, till all of
Right.
us had lost our virginity by the time we graduated from college. But that's pretty late, I think. But we were definitely influenced by all of those, the media that you've been talking about. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, my mother, she only ever was with my father. So she was Gen X. She grew up in Ecuador. It was a very different experience. And then I have friends from sort of all times in life. And I had a friend who was in her 50s and she had a very traumatic experience her first time. And she just never really talked about it. It was like, oh yes, that was the age I was when I had sex for the first time. That's about as skin deep as a lot of the conversations I'd had prior went. I was a later in life virgin. I mean, my essay is called The 26-Year-Old Virgin,
Yeah.
and I'm not religious. So how it happened was interesting and really traumatic. My first time was absolutely horrific. And I dive into that in the essay. I also, in the book, I provide an update as to how I feel about penetrative sex now, because that has also changed since I wrote the essay. And I think for me, this book and the things I say, it's all in flux. It's always changing. And how I feel about, as for me, writing this book and unpacking the messages I receive from these series and these films has actually also been really healing. Something I suggest people do is go back and rewatch that film. Like Gossip Girl, I rewatched it. It's absolutely awful. As in, it's a fun show, but the messages that we got from it as young women growing up, I was 14 when I started watching that show. the lead character, the heartthrob in it, he sexually assaults 2 women in the first episode, and he ends up, marrying the girl and getting everything. That wasn't great for teenage girls to take in as we were growing up. And yet I found rewatching it to be like, oh wow, now I can unlearn that lesson. That's not a guy I want to be with. Whereas if I never rewatched the show, I might still think, oh, Chuck is amazing.
Yeah. Well, you have distance and time and your experiences, obviously. Well, I don't, so that changes it. Your perspective is entirely different, right? Once you go back and look at it. We had shows like That Girl with Marlo Thomas. I don't know. You probably don't even know that was one of the first sort of
No, I know.
Yeah.
I know, but I know her as Rachel's mom on Friends.
Yes, right, exactly. And this was, that's really going back, like women definitely, I don't even know if they covered really women's sexuality. It was more that you were an independent woman allowed to live in your apartment by yourself and get a job. That was about it. It was more than that. But those were the messages. So, but you said in the beginning, there aren't a lot of women who are writers, who are, it has it changed? Because it's mostly men who are.
Unfortunately, not really. The statistics for films directed by women are pretty depressing. I think last year it was something like 9%. And when I wrote my essay in 2020, the year before had been an all-time high of 17%. So it's not great. I think it is. That's why when I watch shows like Furious, I get really excited. That is a female creator, female writing team for I've seen 7 episodes. Only 1 was written by a man. So that's like the show of the summer. Everyone's talking about it. That's pretty exciting. But if you looked at the Oscar nominated screenplays for last year, and there are 10 screenplays nominated, only 1 featured female writer. So that, I think that's pretty abysmal in 2026.
I think it's very abysmal. It's sad. It's very, you said 9% or 1 in 10. Those statistics are horrible.
Yeah, they are. And they've gotten worse. Like, they were better. They were better a few years ago, and now they are worse. And even I was listening to a podcast talking about The Invite, Olivia Wilde's new film, and saying, will she be nominated for Best Director? Because it's not looking like there's any other woman who might be. We're looking for a woman to fill the slot. And even when you look at the Oscars, the year of Barbie, there was also Anatomy of a Fall, which featured a female director. They're very different films. And I remember when the director of Anatomy of a Fall was nominated and Greta Gerwig wasn't, there was this talk of, oh, well, that woman got in, as though there is no world where 2 female directors could be nominated at the same time. The amount of women who've been nominated for Best Director are, still probably in the single digits. It's been, and now the Oscars seem to understand, okay, well, we have space for 1 woman, maybe. Not great.
Dominica, one of the perceptions, I think, is of the millennials is that none of, I think your book is groundbreaking, because the perception of millennials or millennial women is not what you're talking about. It's really, oh, they're free now. They do what they want. They have as many sexual partners they want. It's all great. It's all good. I watch a lot of these shows, and it's like, they, there's a show it's about college girls. I don't know. I can't remember the title. Do you know which one I'm talking about? It's about
Sex Life of College Girls.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So what do you think about that? Because to me, it seemed like, okay, they sleep with who they want. They don't feel guilty about it. There are 4 different characters, and they all come from a different place, but still it's sort of like, yeah, you can do what you want. You don't have to feel guilty, about how many partners you've had. So talk to me about that.
Well, I think that show did also look at how uneven it can be for men and women. I know there's that one female character who is a writer, and and she has sort of an experience that's like untoward, where the men are kind of a Me Too experience, in terms of men who are higher up trying to sleep with women to get, like, that she has to do that to keep her role on the paper. And of course, in the show, I think she blows it up and ends up being in a position of power as a result, which is, I think what Mindy Kaling is doing with that show is putting out a narrative, creating the world you want to see. But I'm not sure it's the world we live in. I don't think it's the world we live in at all. I actually think there's been a huge backlash to the Me Too movement. A lot of people think it went too far, which is really funny to me because most of the men, in terms of at least Hollywood, who, like, I remember Matt Damon talked about, oh, we're not talking about the good men in Hollywood enough. A lot of men who have done really awful, not to a Harvey Weinstein level, but to a sexual harassment level, certainly, we don't know their names because they're still protected. I mean, it's interesting. You watch. I was watching the World Cup with my family, and Brad Pitt was there, and family friends were like, "Oh, look at Brad Pitt." I'm thinking, yeah, the guy who's been accused of abusing his children and his ex-wife, and whose children don't want his last name anymore, but we're still like, "Oh, hey, that's Brad Pitt." So I think that there is this perception that women took it too far, and I feel like women are being punished in many ways for it. I mean, we all see what's happening with women's bodies right now. It's really scary. To me, it seems like that's also been, and that I did a lot. One of the essays dives into women and food and body image. And something I learned, which I've always suspected, is okay, when did it become the norm for women to have to be very thin? When did that become this beauty expectation? Because that wasn't always the way. And it started in the 1800s. It was this, because we were married to we belonged to men due to dowries. If they wanted to ensure that their children were theirs, so making sure that we didn't have affairs. And Balzac writes that if you basically make us wear very uncomfortable clothing, corsets, etc., and you decrease our food, starve us, then we will have less energy to conduct affairs. So that's where it all kind of stems from. And I look at what's happening now as like, okay, I think the cultural view is women took it too far, and let's punish them. Let's make them really tiny again so that they're weak and they don't have energy to fight back. At least that's how it feels to me.
I think there's something to that. Yeah. We're being punished. I think
Yes, we
punished is
are.
the word, right? Then that was it with, you're talking about the Victorian era, wearing those corsets
Mhm.
and layers of clothes, impossible to get out of. And I think even chastity belts. I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure that was the Victorian era, but that was the whole idea. So, but then where do we, I mean, obviously, books like yours and authors like you help to change things and to bring all of this out in the open. But where do we go? I mean, we're going backwards. We don't seem to be going forwards as you're describing it.
I do feel excited when I see shows like Furious. And you know what I get most excited by is that critics love this show. This show is being well reviewed. And a lot of the problem we've had for so long is that most critics have been men for so long. When you look at the top, as a child, and I talk about this in the book too, there's an essay about sort of how very, it's called Thank Heaven for Little Girls, and we look at how young girls are overly sexualized. I know for myself, I got the most sexual attention from men in my life when I was 15 years old. It was really disturbing. And I remember being a teenager and looking up the best movies, and my God, Manhattan was in every top five. And that's not the case anymore. I think that we are looking at things from a different lens. And so when I see that male critics are really responding to Furious and that there are more female critics, when I listen to podcasts now, it's not just two guys talking anymore. There tends to be a man and a woman. That's really important because critics decide, they have such huge influence in what we're watching and what's happening and what the conversation is. So when we're getting more women in there and we're getting more men responding positively to the female gaze, that gives me some hope. That gives me some hope. And also that what I hear a conversation in podcasts talking about the show is part of the reason it's so good is because these women feel real. And that's a real, I play this game sometimes when I see something and I don't know who wrote it. And at the end, I'm like, okay, I guess, was that a man or a woman? And I did that when I saw Honora. I did that when I saw Poor Things, these shows with these films with these big female characters that everyone loves. And in both cases, I thought at the end, okay, that was definitely written by a man. And they were. And with Furious, I didn't know anything about it. I watched it and I thought, there's no way that I'm going to play my game. That was written by a woman. And it was. And you can tell, at least I can tell, when the female characters feel really authentic and they're coming from the female gaze. And I think the more we have of that, the more hopeful I am. I think it's really great that Olivia Wilde's film, The Invite, is being received so well. It's one of the films of the summer. I think that we need to see studios in Hollywood invest much more money into young female filmmakers and having films be made by women. I don't understand how we're not doing that, how that's not happening. It's really frustrating to me to see these statistics. I think there should be real I mean, money is everything, right?
I was
So
going to say, well,
investing
it's the
into that. Yeah.
investors, right? You have to get
Mhm.
people to invest in your film. Who's investing in the films? Men?
Right.
Yeah. So does it always? Well, it does come down to that, right? It does come down to the investors and the money.
And they need to be investing in more than just, it feels like Greta Gerwig, Olivia Wilde, Elizabeth Merriweather. Okay, Chloe Zhao, these are women that we have accepted. We will invest our money in. They've kind of crossed over. They've made it. But we can't just rely on them for these movies and these shows. We need to be investing in more women. And I think really going out of our way to find these young female authors. Literature has done a really good job with this. You go books, it's really even female authors are doing great. I mean, if you only wanted to read books by women, you could and you would never run out of books. That is, if you wanted to only watch movies and shows written by women, you wouldn't have a lot to watch at all. So let's change that. Let's work on at least, I don't know, getting, I'm not even asking for 50% here. Let's cross 20%.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened.
Why do you think that? Why? Well, you're talking about, okay, so books, you know, there's not an issue with that. So many women authors, but not films. No. Why do you think there is such a big gap, a big difference between the two?
That's a really great question. I think it comes down to women write. I think there's also more breadth in books. There's just there's a bigger marketplace. And I think that there is still, of course, we deal with sexism in books, right? Like you have amazing authors like Elizabeth Gilbert and Brene Brown and Glennon Doyle, and these women are categorized as self-help authors. Whereas when men write about their books, they're memoirists. It's very different. So I do think that there still is kind of sort of like this pervasive sexism that exists in the book world. It's just dealt with differently, but at least these women are able to be bestsellers and they're able to do well. I think there's more gatekeeping in film and television. I think there are less films and television shows made than there are books that are published. So there's less opportunities. And I think that there is this kind of worship of certain female filmmakers. I mean, Meryl Streep gave a great interview where they asked her if she would ever want to be in a Martin Scorsese film. And she said, I'd like for him to be interested in a female character, but I don't know that I will live that long. And that was such a great answer, sort of calling that out. But we have the Spielbergs and the Scorseses who are going to mentor more young men, and we've got the Paul Thomas Andersons. And again, all of these men are great filmmakers, but there's always this sort of spot for them in everything. And I think that I think it does come down to this. I think that when we watch movies and film, like movies and TV, they influence us enormously. People are more likely to watch movies and TV than they are to read. And I think that there is some interest from those in power in having us continue to see ourselves as women from the male perspective and not be the wiser, because you don't know who's writing. Most of us go to the movies, we have no idea who's written the film we're seeing. If I talk to young women who are watching TV nowadays, who are Sex and the City is still a really big show. My Teenage Cousins, that's absolutely a rite of passage for them. And they have no idea that these are women who are not written by women. Nobody knows that. Sex and the City is it's still treated like this really formative show. And like these characters are definitive for women. We don't know that. And I think that those in power like it that way. So I really hope that reading my book helps us sort of at least armors us in being able to look at things differently and really from a more critical lens for ourselves in terms of what we want and how we want to see ourselves in the world and how we want to exist and be in the world.
And besides your book, or I should say in addition to your book, I think that MFA programs, you know, I think we should take a look at those. Like, you know, did you go to Tisch?
I did go to Tisch.
Yeah. Okay. Schools like Tisch, top film schools in the country. I don't know what was happening there at the time when you graduated, but isn't it that responsibility for them to be able to encourage women writers, filmmakers, et cetera? It starts there, education.
Absolutely. For me, I was an actor. I still am an actor, but I was only an actor. And I went to a talk by a mentor of mine, and she shared some statistics about the amount of films written by women, the amount of films directed by women, and even that I think 1% of scores for film that year were written by women. 1%, which is just wild. And I heard all of that and I thought, oh, I that is the moment that I decided to really I'd been writing for fun on the side, and I decided to really pursue it because I felt like I had an obligation to. Those statistics were really alarming. I didn't learn those in school though. I learned those at this talk that my mentor gave. So I hope things are different now, but that isn't something that I learned about when I was at Tisch.
Yeah. So I think that's important. That's one avenue that
I
we
agree.
have to pursue. And and mentoring. I think mentoring is key, right?
Yes, mentoring is really, really huge and really important. And I think but that also can be really tricky. Unfortunately, there are some female mentors who I think have this view of it was really hard when I went through it, so it should be hard for you. And then there is I've been mentored by many different women in my life, and the way I've found that has been the most incredible is when you have female mentors who want it to be better and different for the next generations and really want to help. I think finding those women who will support you and who will make the world a fairer place and want to keep improving it, that is the way forward. And those relationships and I really hope to pay that forward one day.
Yeah. Pay forward, look forward. Let's not get stuck in the past. We only have 1 minute left. Okay. So your book, You Are What You See. I love it. I've been talking to the author, Dominica Farad. You Are What You See, How My Favorite Shows Became My Worst Influences. So buy the book, get out there, and give us websites and or other platforms to go to for more information about what you're doing.
If you go to my Instagram, that is Domenica Farrow. And then also my website, domenicafarrow.com. And I'm on TikTok as well, DFarrow, with a lot of my takes on all of the films and shows that are currently airing. I've got a lot of them.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for being on the show today. You were great.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you've been listening to The Kathryn Zox Show.